This is Racing Across America with Seth Merrow.
Welcome back to Racing Across America. Monday morning means a visit from Mike Penna of the Horse Racing Radio Network. Good morning, Mike.
Hey, Seth. Good morning.
And I'm envious, as folks around the country are envious of us up here in the upstate New York area when the middle of July and August roll around. I'm envious of folks like you down in the Lexington area in the springtime and the fall when Keeneland opens up, and you were down there and Horse Racing Radio Network was broadcasting from Keeneland this weekend. Just give us a little overview of opening weekend at Keeneland.
Just an amazing weekend. 7 Breeders' Cup Challenge races contested over the 3 days, including the first $1 million race in the history of Keeneland with the Shadwell Turf Mile on Saturday that featured 2-time reigning Horse of the Year, Wise Dan, for Charlie Lepresti. Yesterday we got a chance to see the Grade 1 Juddmonte Spinster. I know we're going to talk about that later on, but a bit of an upset there. Hard to see that one coming. And, of course, at this time of year, you get to see so many of the top juveniles go postward. Not just here at Keeneland. We saw it at Belmont this weekend as well with all of their challenge races. That's always an exciting time because we can kind of look toward the future. But, the big news going into the Keeneland weekend was the fact that they have now ushered in a whole new era with the traditional conventional dirt surface that replaced the polytrack surface that Keeneland had raced over since the fall of 2006. And I think, from talking to horsemen, from talking to riders, everybody very pleased with the way that the surface performed this weekend and looking forward to the next couple of weeks out there at Keeneland.
Yeah, that was the big question mark. What was the dirt surface going to be like? And I think last week, Jenny Reese, I believe, wrote an article in the Louisville Courier-Journal talking to Charlie Lepresti, and it was notable how enthusiastic he was about the dirt surface because he, I think, was kind of pushing not to make the change because I think he liked the polytrack surface. So when a guy like that said, gave a thumbs up to the dirt surface, that said a lot. I was looking at the dirt results, at least Friday and Saturday. They were about 50% favorites, so there was nothing crazy happening on the dirt surface, which would indicate maybe things were playing a little bit funky. I think it was playing true to form for the most part. So I think the dirt surface was a little bit of a non-story, at least over opening weekend. Before we talk some specifics, I always like to talk a little bit about Horse Racing Radio Network and tout people to pop to your website and pull up the archives. And this week, of course, it was kind of Keeneland-centric, the programming.
Yeah, very much so. Eduardo Caramori and Bill Connolly both joined me on Trainer Talk this past week, and those are not necessarily household names on the trainer side of things, but they do a great job, and each of them has a wonderful story, and I got to visit with them and go back to how they first got started in racing, and Eduardo, of course, has been kind of a world traveler, so he had some unbelievable stories that he was able to tell on that Trainer Talk show. And then on Saturday morning, I had the chance to sit down and talk with Keeneland's Vice President of Racing, Rogers Beasley, and ask him about the change with the surface. And, of course, the field sizes were a bit smaller this weekend than what we've come to see in past years on Fall Stars weekend with the polytrack. And that was one thing about the polytrack. You did get more horses contesting those races for whatever reason. And traditional, conventional dirt surfaces tend to have smaller field sizes. We saw that at Keeneland. Rogers talked about that in depth, and he talked about the future of Keeneland moving forward with this new surface. So that interview is now posted on our website at horseracingradio.net.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'll be interested to hear his comments because, of course, coming out of that Churchill meet, that was a big concern for them at their meet, their September meet as well, field size. And as you say, the switch to the dirt is going to have an effect over at Keeneland. All right, let's shift our attention now to some of the big racing, and I want to pull up probably the most impressive performance in the biggest race of the weekend, the Shadwell Turf Mile Grade 1 event. As you say, the first $1 million race ever at Keeneland. It was Saturday afternoon, and of course, it featured Wise Dan. Mike, we're going to show the entire race here, and I'll alert folks that Wise Dan comes out of the 6th post position. And just watch him coming out of the gate, because I think all of us thought, well, it's not Wise Dan's day as they came out of the gate. He had his head turned, he breaks last, and he just was never really in a good position around the far turn, around the backstretch. And you and I were talking during the commercial break. And in fact, at the 8th pole, we still thought he was probably well beaten. But boy, he turns on the afterjets and gets it done here. Number 6, Wisedan, over number 3, Grand Arch. Number 1, Syed will run 3rd. Maybe some disappointments from number 8, Seek Again, running 6th. Number 2, Optimizer, runs 7th after having run so well versus Wisedan last time in the Bernard Baruch. But again, this was all Wisedan. It sets things up for the potential three-peat in the Breeders' Cup Turf Mile, and it adds another interesting storyline to the Breeders' Cup weekend. But boy, what a performance on Saturday by Wisedan.
Yeah, I don't know how many more superlatives we can use to describe this horse. The 2-time reigning horse of the year. He just really has no idea how to lose a horse race. And when you think, hey, he's vulnerable today, he's not going to show up. Even Seth, I'll tell you, you talked about the start of the race and thinking maybe it wasn't Wisedan's day. Right about the mid-stretch marker, and even as they turn for home, Wisedan is still in 6th position and really doesn't look like he's going to get that momentum rolling, has really no chance to catch leaders, and all of a sudden he just finds another gear and comes rolling on the outside. And the roar from the crowd was just, it sent chills down your spine. And to see him come back after the race, and Keeneland and the horsemen here and the fans here in Lexington are always so appreciative of horses, not just in these big races, but even in the undercard races. They always get a round of applause when they come back to the winner's circle. But there was a little extra in it for Wisedan when he came back, and rightfully so. Just a tremendous performance. It sets him up beautifully for that chance at a three-peat in the Breeders' Cup Mile. If indeed he goes there, his trainer Charlie Lepresti after the race kind of left the door cracked just a little bit that there's a chance he could go in the Breeders' Cup Classic, which would talk about add some intrigue to an already exciting race. That would be incredible if he were to go that direction, but we'll wait and see on that decision. But really, look at what Wisedan has overcome this year, Seth. A horse that underwent surgery for colic in May, nearly died, and then all of a sudden gets back to this particular level. A tremendous training job by Charlie Lepresti, and it just speaks volumes to the heart of this horse.
Yeah, and the thing is, coming out of that comeback effort up at Saratoga, the Bernard Baruch, where really had to work to beat Optimizer, and I think a lot of people were thinking, 7 years old, maybe it's not the Wisedan of old, he's still talented, but maybe it's on the downslope of his career. But boy, after that race on Saturday, and as you say, about the 8th pole, you're still thinking, oh, he's not going to get it done. But not only does he get it done, it's not like he's life and death. He's pulling away at the end.
Yeah, it really was very, very impressive. And, you're right. You look back at that Bernard Baruch and you say, well, it wasn't as flashy as what we've come to see from Wisedan in the past, and maybe he has lost a step. Maybe he's getting long in the tooth at age 7. And even the race before that in the Turf Classic, he's life and death to hold on and beat Seek Again, who, take nothing away from him. He's a top-notch runner. But Wisedan not winning by a big margin that day either. Seth, he just knows how to win, and he just refuses to lose. And Wisedan he's simply all heart, and it's going to be amazing to see him back there in the Breeders' Cup, whichever spot he chooses.
Yeah, and I don't have any argument. If they decide they want to stick in the Breeders' Cup Turf Mile, I don't have any argument with that. I think, as I say, that's intriguing, going after the three-peat. Only one other horse has done that, the incredible Goldacova. So if that's what they decide, I don't have any arguments with that. I had Jenny Reese on yesterday, and she said, yeah, go in the Turf Mile and then try the Clark at Churchill Downs. That's an intriguing game plan. They could maybe make one more start this year and get one on the dirt and see what he does. But I think he has enough of an intriguing story if they go in the Turf Mile. It will add intrigue to the Classic, but again, I don't have any argument. And Morton Fink on the NBC broadcast seemed to indicate they're probably going to stick with the game plan they followed last year.
Yeah, and that was the game plan that Charlie Lepresti laid out after Wisedan had all of his colic issues in May. You remember earlier in the year they were toying around with taking on some of the top older horses on the dirt and maybe pointing for that Breeders' Cup Classic. But when he had those setbacks and had the surgery and all of those things happened earlier this year, Charlie joined me on our Equine Forum show, and he said, even though we thought about it earlier, now that we've had these setbacks, we're just going to take our time with him. We'll let him tell us when he's ready to run, and we're going to point for keeping him on the grass and shooting for a return trip to the Breeders' Cup Mile. Again, that's why I was a little bit surprised to hear him even mention the Breeders' Cup Classic after the race. But I'll be surprised if they go there. I think you're going to more than likely see him in the mile.
And that's a great point. They also mentioned on the broadcast yesterday, on the NBC broadcast, Morton Fink accepting the Eclipse last year, saying, maybe we'll try dirt in 2014. But you're absolutely right. And as you say, Charlie Lepresti brought it up. Things really changed with that surgery this year. And so to see them kind of stick with maybe the game plan that's already worked before is completely understandable. All right.
Yeah, how about the day for John Velasquez as well? This was his third consecutive Grade 1 win on the program. So not bad to be John Velasquez either.
Yeah, a 5 for that included the late pick 4. That was a pretty nice day. And there was Dave Grenig we were talking to yesterday from the Daily Racing Forum who brought up the great point. It was less than a year ago. He had that serious injury that sent him to the hospital and put him on the sidelines, and it just shows what a great athlete this guy is. Put a day together like that at Keeneland, just absolutely phenomenal. That was another great story from the weekend, no question about it.
Yeah, that was on, you remember, his Breeders' Cup Day,
Yeah.
and it was his spleen, when he injured his spleen and had the emergency surgery. And as a matter of fact, I caught up with Johnny in January at the Jockeys Guild meetings, and of course he was just getting back to full strength after that particular injury that he had last year. And I asked him, first of all, Johnny, how many bones have you broken in your career? And he didn't hesitate. He said, oh, geez, I think probably just about every bone in my body. And I looked at him and I said, well, what on earth makes you want to come back and get back on a horse and go back out and ride again? And he told me, Seth, he said, it's like a drug. He said, you need it. When you come down the stretch in a big race, that feeling, there's no feeling like it. And it's like a drug. You want to get back there, and you can't live without it. And that's why these athletes keep coming back and work so hard to get back to the top of the game.
Yeah, and I think you see that in all kinds of sports, football as well. These guys who get injured, but have been at the top of the game, have gone to Super Bowls or whatnot, they come back, and it's true for the jockeys as well. When you're up at the top of the game, I think there is something that just keeps you plugged right into it. But yeah, phenomenal day for him. All right, let's shift to yesterday. Look at the highlight at Keeneland yesterday, which was the Spinster Grade 1 event, $500,000, mile and an eighth for the fillies and mares, and all eyes were on Close Hatches. We're going to watch the stretch run. Close Hatches, the 1-5 favorite, the number 2 horse, absolutely throws out the anchor in the stretch, and the early fractions were not that testing. Close Hatches was getting pressed by Rhea Antonia, but 24 and change, 47, 111. I mean, a runner at the level of Close Hatches should have had no problem with that. But again, she just spits it out in the stretch. Don't Tell Sophia, who was the 5-1 second choice. Pretty nice win for this one. And this is a pretty nice horse in her own right. This is a winner now of 11 starts and 11 wins and 22 starts. Plenty of money in the bank. So she's very, very talented in her own right. Rhea Antonia, a little bit surprising to me, holding on for second. The also talented Molly Morgan runs third. But boy, the surprise in here was Close Hatches. What happened to this one?
Yeah, a very disappointing effort and very surprising. I don't know if anybody could have seen this coming. You know, of course, she was 1-9 in the early wagering. I believe the off odds were 1-5. And it wasn't surprising that if Close Hatches didn't show up for whatever reason, Don't Tell Sophia would be the one in the winner's circle, because she was second choice at 5-1, and she has some credentials. Her only loss in her last 4 starts came at the hands of Close Hatches in the Azeri 2 starts ago at Oaklawn Park. So when she has avoided Close Hatches, she's done pretty well. But today she turns the tables, or yesterday she turns the tables, and for whatever reason, Close Hatches just did not respond when they turned for home. And you could almost see it as they were coming to the quarter pole. Joelle was starting to niggle at Close Hatches and ask her to run a little bit, and she wasn't pulling away from Rhea Antonia, and you kind of sensed that she might be in deep water at that point. And certainly Rhea Antonia ran a big race, but you don't expect Close Hatches to back up the way she did.
No, that was absolutely amazing. Fired off some big show prices. Show prices, 14 and change, 37 and change, 30 and change, with a lot of bridge jumpers heading into the water with the 4th place finish by Close Hatches. And it's going to be interesting to see how she bounces out of this. Now, I think we were all looking forward to a Close Hatches versus Beholder matchup in the Breeders' Cup, and this certainly took the air out of that.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. It makes Beholder look pretty darn good. Of course, that's her home surface out there at Santa Anita. She'll try to defend her title in that distaff. And Close Hatches, in most people's estimation, was going to be the one to challenge her. But after this effort, you have to really wonder if she'll bounce back to what we saw at Saratoga, say, in the personal ensign. But you mentioned the big show prices. 88% of all the money bet to show in this race was on Close Hatches. And you think about that number, that's staggering. And then when she finishes fourth, it did trigger those big show prices. Just incredible. You couldn't have seen this coming. And for Don't Tell Sophia, she's going to have to buck some history in the distaff, because the last spinster winner to go on and take the Breeders' Cup distaff, Inside Information, all the way back in 1995.
But she's easy to root for, though. As I said on the NBC broadcast, they paid $1,000 for her at auction. She's now won probably over $800,000 with the purse yesterday, something like that. So she's certainly easy to root for, and adds another nice storyline to the potentially the Breeders' Cup. We'll have to see how that works out. Speaking of Breeders' Cup implications, we're going to take a look at two-year-old races now. After last weekend, American Pharoah certainly looked to have a lock on the two-year-old scene. But in both New York and Keeneland, there were a couple of nice two-year-old performances in the stakes races there. I think on the boys' side, there was a little bit of noise in New York and Keeneland for two-year-olds. On the girls' side, not so much. I think Angela Renee, with the win over the track last weekend, still looks pretty good. But on the boys' side, let's first take a look at the Breeders' Futurity on Saturday at Keeneland. $500,000, Grade 1 event, and it will be the number 5 Carpe Diem getting it done. And only the second career start for Todd Pletcher. Broke the maiden on September 1st up at Saratoga in the career debut. Comes back in the second start of the career and wins a Grade 1 event under, again, Johnny Velasquez. Running second, the intriguing Mr. Z for Wayne Lucas, who broke the maiden in the career debut at Churchill, then ran second in the Sanford up at Saratoga, as well as the Saratoga Special, but a poor fifth in the Iroquois. Nice comeback here, nice rebound here to run second in this race. And the number 6 Bold Conquest for Wayne Catalano runs, Bold Conquest for Steve Asmussen, who had run second in the Iroquois last time, runs a decent third. Disappointment for me maybe was Hashtag Bourbon, who was coming out of a third in the Iroquois, and I thought might be a little bit interesting. He runs a kind of a poor ninth in here at only 7-2. But the favorite, 2-1 Carpe Diem, and as they say, throws his hat in the fire, as so to speak, for two-year-olds heading out to the Breeders' Cup.
Yeah, and just real quick on Hashtag Bourbon, I agree. I thought Hashtag Bourbon may be the horse to play in here. As a matter of fact, I made a little win wager on him, thinking that he had some trouble in the Iroquois last time, and if he had had clear sailing there, he might have been the winner. But he had another troubled trip on Saturday in this Breeders' Futurity. He was kind of mired and buried in traffic toward the back of the pack and never really did get clear sailing until it was far too late. So I'll forgive him that effort, but he kind of has the look at this point of a horse that just tends to find himself in trouble. So he'll have to overcome that as he matures. But he's a very talented horse, the son of Super Saver. Back to the winner, though, Carpe Diem. I was ultra impressed with this horse. A son of Giants Causeway, half-brother to 2010 Breeders' Futurity winner J.B. Thunder, and he snaps an 0-for-11 skid by favorites in the Breeders' Futurity. He just looks the part, and with that pedigree, being by Giants Causeway out of an unbridled song there, the distances really shouldn't be an issue, and the way he drew away from this field, he looked like a good thing. Just very, very impressive, and I'm looking forward to seeing that showdown with American Pharoah and even Daredevil, who was so impressive in winning the Champagne. We'll talk about that in a minute. But those three all looking pretty good, and they're preps for the Breeders' Cup Juvenile, and that should be an exciting race. Yeah,
again, American Pharoah last week looked pretty good, but a couple of names have now joined the list, and Carpe Diem being one of them. And you alluded to Daredevil. We'll take a look at that now in the Champagne in New York. Grade 1, $500,000. Again, it's Todd Pletcher, but Javier Castellano stayed home and rode Daredevil. As we watch the stretch run, it will be Daredevil, the number 6 horse, getting it done in the 6-horse field. Upstart, the New York bred, who I thought was kind of intriguing, is a good second in here after having raced against New York breds in the first 2 starts of the career and having won both of those starts, but I think he validated himself as a legitimate 2-year-old in open company. Number 5, The Truth or Else, runs third. Disappointment in this race is probably the number 1, El Kabir, who ran a big maiden-breaking Beyer number, a 93, up at Saratoga in the second career start. El Kabir went off as the second choice on Saturday at 5-2, but winds up running 4th in here. But the winner, again, a second-time starter for Todd Pletcher off a maiden breaker in the career debut back in the middle of September. Daredevil certainly looks like a legitimate 2-year-old as well.
Yeah, very good win. He will still have to answer the question whether he can perform in this same fashion on a dry surface, because remember, he broke his maiden in the mud at Belmont Park on September 13th. He catches another wet track for the Champagne, so he'll have to perform at this same level on a dry track. He'll more than likely get that opportunity at Santa Anita in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile, but a very talented runner, and I look forward to seeing him go to the post out there as well.
Yeah, it's certainly a couple of, as I say, 2-year-old performances at Keeneland and New York. On the boys' side, the girls' side, both of the races, the Alcibiades and the Frizette, I'm not quite sure about the winners in those races. We'll see. But I think on the boys' side, we have some legitimate contenders. Mike, I got to ask you, did you get a chance? Obviously, the performance of the weekend was Wise Dan, but did you get a chance to watch the ARC yesterday and see Trev, which was almost equally impressive, I think, given what she had kind of failed to do earlier this year, but comes back and repeats in the ARC yesterday?
Yeah, I did have a chance to watch it. It was perfect. Right before I left my house to head to Keeneland, the ARC was going off, so it worked out beautifully with the timing yesterday. And Trev, how about that? What was she, 15-1?
Yeah,
Is that the price that you got on her?
Yeah, incredible. Yeah.
Yeah, a huge effort from her. I think she's on her way to the breeding shed, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
So I don't think we'll see her over here for Breeders' Cup. But it was really good to see her go out in that fashion, and she just took it to them. It was great to see her rebound and get back to top form.
And how about, I'll toss this out there too, because I know you guys look at a bunch of stakes races on your stakes previews on the Horse Racing Radio Network, so maybe you had a chance, or maybe not yet, but I want to toss in there Santa Anita Sprint Championship. The Hong Kong Invader, Rich Tapestry, comes over here and wins. That's going to be another horse that's going to add some nice intrigue to the Breeders' Cup.
Yeah, there's a lot of great storylines surrounding this year's Breeders' Cup, and you might not have some of the big names that we saw last year, like Mucho Macho Man and Game On Dude and Will Take Charge, and even Palace Malice, who we were expecting to see earlier in the season, who was so dominant. We might not have those kind of big names, but we have new names that have burst onto the scene. You have Shared Belief, and you have California Chrome, and now you have this horse here that defeats Golden Sense, who I thought ran pretty well, but ends up second behind this horse, who could be any kind. Just all these different storylines going into the Breeders' Cup just make it so much fun for fans, and so much fun for us in the media to cover when we put all of our pieces together for our broadcast.
Yeah, there really are a lot of great storylines. So why don't you give us a little update? Horse Racing Radio Network, we are approaching the Breeders' Cup. What's your schedule look like over the next few weeks leading into the Breeders' Cup?
Yeah, going to be a busy couple of weeks. We come back on Wednesday afternoon with our coverage of the Jessamine Stakes, which is another win in your inn out of Keeneland. We'll have that coverage at 4 o'clock on Wednesday. And then on Saturday, the QE2 Challenge Cup comes up. We'll have that coverage at 4:30. The following Saturday, we come back with the Lexus Raven Run at 4:30 Eastern. And then it's all Breeders' Cup from there on out. And we'll be on site at Santa Anita with more than 17 hours of Breeders' Cup Week coverage, including the exclusive national broadcast of every single Breeders' Cup race Friday and Saturday.
Like I say, I'm envious. Keeneland and then on to Santa Anita for the Breeders' Cup. However, if we're all envious, we can check out the Horse Racing Radio Network broadcast and kind of live vicariously through the folks at Horse Racing Radio Network. You can find out more at the Horse Racing Radio Network website. Mike, thanks for the visit. We'll talk to you again next week.
You got it. Thanks, Seth.
Mike Penna, Horse Racing Radio Network. We'll take a break. When we come back, we'll hit some more of the news from the past couple of days and talk a little bit about some of the stakes action over the weekend as well. Right after this, stay tuned. Racing Across America does continue.